Here is using adjustment layers to affect your, we'll talk about density and contrast predominantly. We're also going to talk about selections and selecting highlights and shadows separately and how we will alter them. You need to create, you have two prints from the darkroom. One is neutral, one has been split toned. I want you to take a scan of that negative and match the neutral print. So for that, you will use tools in Photoshop, image adjustments. Oops, see, I'm not getting what I expect here. So I've already done some playing with this file. I need to make sure I'm on the proper layer. I'm not on the proper layer. I'm on one of the other layers. So if you can't do what you want, boom, go check to make sure you're on the proper layer. First thing you might encounter. The other thing you might encounter is being on the wrong tool. You might have a tool like cropping tool often inhibits me from doing other things. And I don't know why, but I'll see these cropping lines. Sometimes you can check the tool, make sure you're on the proper layer. All right, so anyways, layer, new adjustment layer, and curves. I like curves best. They give me flexibility. I see my histogram. I can alter that. I can alter that. And it's like altering levels. Levels is another thing that you find, but levels just allows you to alter your shadows and your highlights, but it gives you the midpoint, which you don't necessarily have on curves directly, but you do in a sense, because if I take the middle and I drag it this way, I make things darker. If I drag it the other way, I make things lighter. Also, when I drag it this way, we can think about density. When I drag it, it looks lighter. And we have to be careful with density because we have to think about our process of density. Am I shooting a negative or am I making a negative? And if you're shooting a negative or making a negative or making a transparency, this adds density. Making things lighter adds density. Now, if we're thinking of output for an inkjet print or if we're printing a negative onto traditional silver paper, adding density makes things black. There's more light hitting the paper, and therefore it makes area in the print darker. Activates more silver in the darkroom, or puts more ink down in an inkjet print process. So we have to, when we're thinking about density, we have to think about the process that we're using. So that's very important. So if I'm thinking about printing an inkjet print, this is taking away density. This would be adding density. If I'm making a negative, this adds density, this takes away density. In this class, we're going to use create a lot of digital negatives. So a lot of times when we're talking about density, we're talking about making things lighter, and that adds density into that thing we print out to make the image. All right, so density affects it. Also, of course, contrast affects it. The best way to deal with contrast, in my opinion, is I don't like the sliders. They limit me. I can't do extreme things or nuanced things. So I like to use my curves. And so with curves, the first thing I do when I do it, be it a digital file or something I scanned in, usually I put a point in the middle, and then I take the shadows and I drag them down just a little bit, and I take the highlights and drag those up a little bit. You see how that adds contrast. Most digital files benefit from contrast. This file is not. Thinking about rules of print. A couple rules of print is we never want blacks without texture. Almost. I say never, but every rule is meant to be broken, but almost always you never want blacks without texture. And you don't want highlights that are paper white. There should be just a little bit of density there. All right, so this is just too dark. Another thing to be aware of is your screen. I've turned the brightness of my screen all the way up, but unless you're calibrating your screen, and that might, you have to invest in a calibration system, which is going to be a couple $100s, and it takes time, and you have to, maintain that. You have to do that once in a while to make sure your screen remains consistently calibrated. If you don't do that, we really need to pay attention to numbers and things like that. So, anyways, we look at this. All right, so there's contrast. I don't like it, particularly the shadows. They get really dark. But I might be able to, maybe I want the overall contrast, but maybe I just want to pull that up just a little bit. And then I get a little more texture, and it still looks dark. And that's better. Highlights, I don't think it's gone completely paper white. We do have this spike here. You know, we may want to bring that down just a little bit, something like that. So that might be a way I interpret this negative. And you do have 3 files you need to make. You need to interpret it however you want, and that might be this. And then you need to match your silver print, and then you need to match your split tone silver print. All right, so matching your silver print, I don't have the print visual here, but this is actually pretty close. I did match it previous to it with curves, so if I get rid of that, my curve 1. This looks pretty similar to the actual print that I was working from. All right, so we'll turn that off and let's go back to this curve, kind of like how this looks. Actually, no, we'll leave that. All right, so then I need to click back on this. All right, okay, so we got that set. We matched the print, and I also have a curve that makes an interpretation of this. So there's 2 files down. Now I need to do the difficult one, and that's matching the split tone one. Now, I have, for you could do it visually and look at your split tone. What I would encourage you to do is photograph that or scan it in, and then use that information. I don't want you to turn in that scan as the thing you've done. I want it to be from this original file. So, here is I photographed this in the lighting studio, and this is my split turn version. I photographed this print before I toned it, and then I photographed it after under the same lighting, same setting, so things are consistent. Consistency can be important for accuracy. You can see that the print changed quite a bit through split toning. This is lighter in value. There's more information coming out here, and that's a positive in my opinion. Also, of course, there's this hue change. That's what we want to focus on. We want to make your file here match what your split tone print looks like. So like I said, it's helpful if we have a digital version, a fairly accurate digital version. So what I would like you to do is to use layers, new adjustment layers, and curves, and color balance probably is the best tool for this, to manipulate the color to match it. All right, so to do that, the first thing we need to do is we need to go to our original file, and we need to make sure we're on the right layer. And we go to select, and we select color range. And we don't have color, but one thing we can do is we can select midtones, highlights, and shadows. I want to select highlights. Select your highlights. Make those highlights go to, this goes 0 to 255. Let's do slightly more than half. Highlights are 125 to 155. Actually, it would be like 127, right? But I'm going to select down to 120 in the highlights, 120 to 255. I will hit OK. We'll see the selections, little bounding boxes everywhere. And then I'm going to go select, modify, feather, and I'm going to feather 6 pixels. Kind of a random selection, but I want it less than that overlap that I created. So I feathered that. Now I want to create a layer, new adjustment layer, and this is just going to affect now the selected area, which is the highlights. And I want to select color balance. In color balance, you can title it here if you want. That can be helpful when you get lots of layers. Gives me access to cyan, red, magenta, green, yellow, blue, and I can do those separately. All right, so I want to go look at this. I want to take my eyedropper tool, and these are all your tools here. So find the eyedropper tool. It could be buried. There are other tools there. Click and hold, and you'll see other tools. Select that eyedropper tool, and I want to look at the highlights. I'm going to zoom in on this in a specific area. I'm going to look this board above the window right there. I'm going to try and be consistent in my selection. I want to see that. So I can go to Info. If you can't find Info, remember Windows, and then find the thing you're looking for, Info. And what I'm looking at here, RGB and CMYK. As photographers, we function in RGB space for printing if you're going to a lab or even your printers. That's the RIP color space. It can be altered with CMYK, but that's what I use. But I'm going to actually look at the CMYK numbers. They make more sense to me. But you could look at the RGB numbers. All right, anyway, so I'm going to go to this spot right here. And what I see in the highlights is 16% cyan, 21% magenta, 15% yellow. So I have more magenta. I'm going to come up here. I'm curious. I did this earlier and I came up with some different numbers, but that seems fairly consistent. I think I started in the shadows. Okay, anyways, so what I want to do is I want to somewhat match that. So I would say I'm gonna shoot for 15 cyan, 15 yellow, and 20 magenta. That's what I'm going to shoot for. No black. All right, so I'm going to come over here, and I'm going to click back on my layers, and I created that new color balance layer. Click on this, and I'll bring that window back. And I want to add a little bit of yellow, quite a bit of magenta, maybe even a little cyan. All right, so now I come back here, I go back to this area, click on my info window, and I'm shooting for 20 magenta, 15 and 15. So I'm pretty close, actually. I might leave this. 90% magenta, 14, 16. Okay, great. Oh, wait, no, that's what I'm shooting for. That's mother file. Here, I want to zoom in, and I want to try and find that similar area. Press bar brings up the hand thing and drag it down right around here. And I have 21, 17, 10. I need more yellow, mostly. I'm okay with magenta where it fell at. So I'll come back to this, double click on that. I need more yellow, I believe. So I'm going to hike that up. And now I'm going to click back on the info, and I want to see what I get. So now I'm 11% yellow. I could use more. Click on this, double click on that. Not quite that much. Maybe right about there. It's a little bit of a guessing game. You go until you get it. Go back to this area. Okay, now I'm at 14, 18, 20. I think I'm just going to remove cyan a little bit this time, and that'll get it more in balance. So I'm actually going to go back to like 0. All right, and then click on info, and then look at this. All right, so now I'm at 18, 14. I'm going to go back and add a little bit of red. I thought I was going to be done there, but let's go add 3 red, and then click on this. Let's see where we end up. Info palette. All right, there, that's better. 16, 13, 21 seems more in line with what the other file looks like as far as the numbers go in the highlights. So I would encourage you to look at the numbers unless you're calibrating your screen and doing that consistently. I go with the numbers. They're probably going to look a little bit different, but I'm going to go with the numbers. I could keep tweaking it and get it perfect, but this would be fine for what we're doing here. All right, so now we look at this, and now I want to look at the shadow areas. And so I'm going to click the space bar and then move this, and I want to find the dark area on this window. It seems very consistent here. So what I find is about 75% magenta and yellow and 54% cyan. So there's a 20% difference here. Now, this becomes significant. When we split tone an image, the idea is we're going to use 2 different colors, and it's not to mix those colors, but it actually creates your shadows of one color and your highlights of a different color. And this is what we're seeing. In our highlights, we see more magenta, cyan, and yellow or less, so we get more of this magenta purpley color in the highlights. In the shadows, however, what we're getting is more of an orangish color. Magenta and yellow are making orange. So the shadows are more orange, the highlights are more purpley. And that's what we expect. First toner should influence the shadows, second toner should influence the highlights. Okay. Great. Now let's try and make it match. So I want to get 75% magenta and yellow, 55% cyan is what I'm shooting for. I come over here, and now I need to go back to that base layer. Hit that, hit select, modify, or select color range, excuse me. And now rather than highlights, I'm going to select shadows. And here I'm going to go 0 to 130. Great, it's already at 130. So I drag that slider till it's 130, I hit OK. I go select, I hit modify, I hit feather, 6 pixels wide to before, we'll do that again. I create a new adjustment layer, and I go back to color balance, and this time I want it to be less cyan, so we'll start with 20 less cyan, and more magenta and more yellow. So we'll add those somewhat equally. And then click on this, drag it up to this window, find that similar area, and click on info. And here I have, I need, magenta's almost there, I need more yellow and less cyan. More yellow and less cyan. So click back on here, click that. less cyan, more yellow. All right, now let's see what we've got as we click on this info. So I need more yellow. Cyan's about right, so just a titch more yellow. Let's click back on this, double click that, and we'll go up to 32. Great. Info. All right, so now there we go. My numbers are pretty close to what the numbers were when I photographed that previous image. Now, the thing I'll say is I'm not sure that they're going to visually match. But actually, it doesn't look too bad. There is the original toned print photograph. This is my neutral scanned-in negative that I altered. So they don't match perfectly, but they're pretty close, and I always default to my numbers as opposed to the visuals because I don't keep my screen constantly calibrated. Anyways, all right, so there's that process. I would like you to end up with 3 files, one where you match the darkroom print, the neutral one, then you match the split tone one, and then you take what you learned there and you make whatever you want with that third one. You just take in the original, the scan of the negative and make it, add the contrast, the density. You can even put a little tone in there. Don't make it super funkily colored, but if you want to put a little color in there, that would be fine by me. So just a little saturation would be okay. There you go.